The castle. Marico Fabelnad stepped on the ledge to overlook the plain. There in the distance, on the wide, flat, autumn, treeless tundra plain, he could see a small hill on which the castle was built. It seemed to him merely a silhouette somewhere far in the thick coat of rain and fog. The sun was setting somewhere behind dark clouds, and soon it would no longer be visible. He put his monocular up to his right eye and looked for a sign of the airship. They had been sitting in the small rift behind a rock ledge for 1 week now. Making a fire was too dangerous, so they had been freezing in the icy rain. As Marico was holding his monocular towards the horizon, he spotted something. There it was, a little speck closing in on the castle. He looked closer. The silhouette seemed to suggest their information was still correct. He climbed down into the rift, where Lesenco and Ulina sat close together, looking up to him. "Anything?" Ulina asked. Marico smiled and nodded. "You guys can stop cuddling." The joke was old, 1 week old. They had been sticking together for 1 week, literally, to preserve warmth. But the two did not mind the pun, given the prospects of finally ending their freezing misery. "Give me that." Lesenco had stood up and demanded the monocular. Marico handed it over and collected his things, getting ready to move. He went over to the horse, which stood a bit further away, freezing and grazing. Lesenco reached the ledge, and after a while he came back, climbing down. "Yes, it's a TOT-31, that is for sure. Could spot that flying duck from any distance." Marico nodded, pleased. "Good, we are ready then." "Not yet." Ulina walked over to the two men and began adjusting their uniforms. She and Lesenco were wearing white leather armor with golden symbols on them. Their equipment, such as their sword scabbard, were of black leather, and so was a black shoulder pad on which the golden rank symbols drew in the eyes. All three had agreed. It was a very neat bit of textile work. Marico, however, wore a white long trench coat. It was thick and heavy, and had absorbed so much water it lay immensely heavy on Marico's shoulders. On top of it sat most notably a kind of golden garb, a piece of traditional Order of Soul priesthood attire. It was embroidered with many symbols, all of which Marico had carefully studied. "Are you ready, honorable expert?" Lesenco said, after Ulina had made sure they looked somewhat passable. "Yes, we are," Ulina answered in Marico's stead. He nodded, then went over to the horse and swung himself on its back. Together, they began to march out of the rift, beginning their wide circle around the castle, to stay unseen until they had reached the road leading to the northern gate. The sun was setting amongst the storm clouds, and slowly darkness took hold when Marico neared the northern gate, with Ulina and Lesenco as guards on his right and left, marching in step next to him. A persistent rain came down, and the wind whipped it down the road. They were certainly spotted by now, and he was getting a bit nervous. He could see all the way down to the castle gate that lay at the end of the perfectly flat road. There, where it lifted to enter through the castle gate, sat precisely equally sized small huts, tents, and other facilities. As they walked by, Marico spotted masons, rope makers, woodcutters, and more. Somewhere further down to the right, there was a bigger square on which multiple wagons were parked, some of which still with horses and oxen in front of them. They were being offloaded into several adjacent squares in which stones, wood planks, barrels, crates, and other raw materials stood stacked up neatly in piles of the exact same length and width. Each square sported a Frankenland and the Onodam flag with surprisingly spotless white. People could be seen walking up and down the street with intent, going about their business on the neat and clean stones of the road. That road had begun a bit further away from the castle and its settlement and had grown around the construction site. Carts coming in towards the logistics area had their wheels cleaned before entering the road to not leave any residue of dirt behind them. As they came closer to the gate, they could see two guards standing in upright posture and straightforward look to the sides of the castle gate. The gatehouse was half finished, like the wall to the right. A bit further down the wall, they could see a wooden wheel that was being turned by a couple of runners inside of it, lifting stones along pulleys up to the wall. The closer they came to where the guards stood, the more people talked only about the very essential construction processes and worked in silence apart from that. It did not escape Marico that most of the workers seemed to be of the night shift, many of them yawning and still strapping on their jackets, exchanging tools with some who went into the tents and huts, presumably to go to bed. This was a detail that was not contained in the report, an essential detail. They finally reached the soldiers in front of the gate. Marico stopped the horse before walking through. He sat down from it. Immediately, one of the soldiers sprang into action. "Stable boy!" he shouted. Not many raindrops had fallen as the stable boy came running towards them. The horse was removed into the center of the castle. Marico moved over to the right soldier and saluted the priest's salute. "Your name, compatriot?" "Gad Helner, your expertness," said the white soldier, reciprocating with the soldier's salute. "I would like to speak to the garrison commander, compatriot Helner." Helner saluted again, then turned 180 degrees on the spot and marched towards the castle keep. They had not even all crossed the gate yet, when there was already a new soldier in place who had come from somewhere up the wall to replace Helner. As they marched silently towards the entrance of the keep, which was still in construction, missing a couple stories that so far were merely wooden scaffolding, Ulina closed in and walked a bit closer to Marico. "Whoever runs this site is an absolute fanatic and an effective one," she whispered through the thunder. She fell back to her post without waiting for Marico's response. He understood what she meant. A shudder ran down his spine. What had he gotten himself into? He was not at all certain if his time in Basilini and his later diplomatic education with Ariane Guardan were enough to talk himself out of this one if it became necessary. What he was trying today, was it worth the risk? He heard a shriek. It came from above him, where he saw the TOT-31. It was a bulky carrier airship of a small grunter scale that could nonetheless defend itself, with multiple turrets mounted above and below the hull. He had read the ship files on it very carefully, although it was Lesenco who was supposed to be able to fly it. The shriek, however, had come from the dragon, which was supposed to pull the ship into place. Somehow, one of the pointy tower tips had been pushed over by a gust and hit the poor beast against the neck. Now it fluttered around in pain, forwards and backwards, and eventually fell from the sky and landed not far away on the ground. It was bleeding from its neck and all over the central plaza. Marico and the others had stopped. Helner ran off towards the inside of the keep. Unsure if they were supposed to follow, the three of them watched as the beast struggled to get up, and the airship above slowly drifted off. The men and women on board had, however, already slung ropes around the bollards at the landing platform, which had been built aside from the keep into the main tower of the inner ring. They were now trying to pull the ship back into position, and eventually, with the help of a few soldiers, it got dragged into position without the help of the dragon, who still lay on the ground. Now a woman with silvery steel armor and golden symbols on black bits of textile had come walking out of the keep with Helner not too close behind. She saw the dragon on the ground. "Is that the garrison leader, you think?" Lesenco whispered. Marico shrugged. "I assume she's going to call the healer?" "I don't think they have healers here. Radiant magic being forbidden and all that," Lesenco argued. Marico nodded. "Yeah, this poor fellow is doomed." Ulina shook her head. The woman in iron armor stood now above the dragon. Without having a closer look at the wound, she pulled out her sword and within a moment had it pushed through the neck of the animal, which twitched in pain and then sank to the ground. With a gesture, she made a few of those watching aware that they were responsible for carrying away the dead body. "Remove the soul and clean the ground," she shouted as she came walking over, straight towards Marico. Within a short distance, she stopped abruptly and saluted. "Your expertness," she said. He smiled, condescendingly, how he had practiced it. "What is your name and rank, compatriot?" "Coordinate Inquisitor Ariane Guardan." "Oh, Inquisitor, how so?" thought Marico to himself. Then he forced himself to smile. Chapter 1, Part 2. Ariane. The priest in front of her seemed to take a moment to think about what she just said. It was enough for her thoughts to wander towards her dirty blade that was still dripping blood. She looked around and let compatriot Helner take it away for cleaning in exchange for his clean blade. She looked back at the three of them. They looked like one priest and two guards who had been on the road for a long time. And they were so dirty. The white of their clothes was beige by now. It disgusted her. "What brings your expertness to this remote venture? I inquire, so I might make myself useful," she said, formally, how it was taught to her during her time in the Honor's youth. "I must see the construction of the chapel. I heard there were material transports who had come in, and although it is said that the revered fellow architect has been preparing for the construction, I must be convinced myself. For a moment, she waited, expecting more. Surely nobody would travel out that far like this, especially not with his rank, with merely 2 guards on such a simple mission, unless they had something secretive in mind. She waited for a moment. It slowly became uncomfortable. Then eventually she nodded her head. Certainly, the castle garrison is at your disposal. The priest, who had still failed to introduce himself, nodded. He turned around. Compatriot Gadosk, if you might, take compatriot Galrin with you to have a look at the chapel, and after inspection of the goods on the transport, you may put yourself to rest. The 2 soldiers, apparently Gadosk and Galrin, saluted and marched off. Their gestures were cleanly executed. She appreciated that, and so she saw fit to say, I assume you might desire to wash yourself. We, of course, have chambers for your honor that we can prepare. Chapter 1, Part 3. Marico. The readiness is appreciated, compatriot, he finished and glanced after Lesenco and Ulina as they made their way behind the chapel. From there, they would soon be able to reach the detention block, as was intended. Now it was on him to not blow the mission. But first, I would like to discuss a few things. If there's a place where we might have a quiet word. She nodded and signaled him to follow. On the way into the keep, he thought fast. As they walked between carpenters and masons through the narrow corridor, they passed a room with a big table in the middle. Some architects and construction logistic coordinators stood around it, heavily arguing over the correct process. As they walked by, he could fetch up a few words about the speed of construction. Apparently, everyone here was in some sort of rush. He assumed it was the downward pressure applied from the top, which had through recent years led to castles being built all the way down the line between Frankenland and Catomea. He forced himself to put the attention back on his plan. In his mind, he went over the next things he wanted to talk about with her. First, he needed to reveal his identity, then have a discussion with material requests of the temple. And lastly, he wanted her report to know if he was safe. But what if it was not enough? He had hoped that they could operate with nobody around at night. But the night shift would require Lesenco and Ulina to be extra careful. Inquisitor Guardan entered an isolated room with 2 guards in front of it, and he followed. It was a modest but very neat room with a small window that had a view down on one of the courtyards. Of course, he had known about this room before he ever had put a foot into it, but now seeing it exactly like it was laid out in a construction plan gave him a sense of confidence. He knew where everything around him was. He knew the stairs they had just taken and the way they needed to go to get to the airship platform, or to the small announcement platform that was hanging above the main plaza, just a few steps outside the door. The door was shut behind them, and now they were alone. Guardan turned around and smiled. "How can I serve?" she said. He smiled as well. Maybe they were more alike than he thought. Through her thinly veiled smile, he could see an understanding diplomat, used to lies, just as he was himself. "I want to request some of the plans. Specifically, I need floor plans for the temple, and I do want to know about the adjacent passages." "Don't worry," Ariane smiled. "Everything is already prepared in your personal quarter." He nodded. His mouth got dry. He felt that she wanted to end the conversation quickly, but he needed her to be absent from duty for a little longer. But maybe it was not worth the risk. He thought about it, and then nodded, pleased. "Well, compatriot Guardan, I'm very pleased to hear, and grateful for your service. I am also in appreciation of the order in which I found the keep today." He was ready to let her end the conversation, but now she smiled again and continued. "If I may ask your expertness, who are you?" For a moment he was startled by her frankness. Then he quickly made sure to turn his delayed reaction into a test if she'd panic by an authority's delayed reaction to her question. But she didn't. So he, as if it was the plan all along, nodded approvingly. "I am Citadel Priest Caden of the Malar Order." For a moment she was silent, searching his face for a sign. Chapter 1, Part 4. Ariane. Malar. How was it possible that such an extraordinary member would have come and made his way all the way to Frankenland? Was it just by chance? Of course, Malar and Custodia were everyone's ambition. Living, working, and serving there was an honor in and of itself. And this man came from there, and made his way all the way down here? It was her chance to ask him how to make her way out of this stinking country. "Oh, you must tell me everything about it. How are the roads there? How are the places? Have you ever attended a parade? Have you ever laid eyes on the Emperor?" Chapter 1, Part 5, Marico. He tried not to freeze, walking towards the window as if in thought of a wiser answer. He had never been to Custodia proper, never been to Malar. He had hoped it would give him authority, not questions. On the upside, now he had questions to answer, which could take a while. If everything went smoothly, it would be enough for Lesenco and Ulina to get their jobs done, given the increased difficulty of the present night shift. But what worried him more than that was that Ariane, in actuality, might not be interested at all. Just curious to find out what he knew about the place to check if he spoke the truth. And that thought worried him as he turned around and said, "I have never laid eyes on a person more magnificent than the Emperor." Chapter 2, Prisoners, Part 1, Detention Block. Ulina. Unseen, Ulina and Lesenco slipped into the corridor that led down the stairs from the temple to the storage room. They stopped behind a corner, then looked back and saw that nobody followed. Then they hurried through the storage rooms and walked further. Eventually they reached the detention block, where 2 guards stood in perfect upright form, their eyes straight forward. The entrance to the prison was an iron gate of clean metal bars reflecting in lantern lights and embedded into a freshly built stone wall. Typical, Ulina thought. First 2 buildings to stand, a temple and a prison. The soldiers directed their attention towards Ulina and Lesenco, who stopped and saluted. Ulina took a small bag she had carried and opened it. From it, she took a scroll and showed it to the guardsman. "We have been entrusted by the priest Caden to take stock of the prisoners and control their mental state." The 2 soldiers looked at each other. Then the left one said, "Well, if you have the order, you don't need to show me the paper. Just go in." "I require a key." The second soldier banged against the steel of the gate, and from the dark alleyway came a man with a torch and a neat angled key holder with what must have been at least 30 keys on it. "Help me," one of the guards commanded. The jailer, a young man with an already receding hairline and some strangely expressionless eyes, nodded. He turned around and started to walk into the block. Ulina and Lesenco exchanged nervous glances. They had hoped to be handed the keys. It was, in fact, absolutely required. It was, in fact, absolutely required for the plan to work. But there was no point in debating it in front of the guards. They needed to try and convince the jailer on his own. And soon. They were already taking longer than expected, and Marico would need to be the one to buy them time. Chapter 2, Part 2. Keep. Marico. "Have you ever traveled to the Holy City?" Marico inquired in an attempt to find out more about her than she did about him. "I have, actually," she admitted. Marico felt a sting. He'd never been. Yet again he felt the need to switch the topics. Fast. An absolute marvel, isn't it? I am still hoping to see the day on which the construction of it might be finished, but I also know I might never see it. I'm getting old. Very slowly, but surely. "You must not be much older than me," she remarked inquisitively. Chapter 2, Part 3. Keep. Ariane. He shrugged his shoulders. "I don't know your age," he said. She had noticed him switching the topic, and slowly doubts kept creeping up on her. But she pushed them aside. Here was someone from the very place she wanted to end up one day. It was now time to ask questions she would never get an answer from anywhere else. "As you can see, I have intentions to rise through the ranks myself. I have been working towards establishing the order ever since I was an honest youth, but I'm struggling to make my way into the Malar echelons. I would like to. Is there anything you could suggest that might help me succeed?" He looked at her for a moment, clearly thinking about it. Chapter 2, Part 4. Keep, Marico. A sense of relief. An idea formed in his head. "I see you're running a well-prepared operation. As the head of military in any local operation, as we both know, it is your task, in absence of a priest, to establish order. And I see you do so exceptionally well. And you truly believe, very deeply from a very young age, which I admire. I think all of these are qualities which will bring you forward. In fact, I must say I've been very impressed with the construction site so far." He walked away from the window and sat down, allowing him to slip in a small pause for dramatic effect. "I would be willing to put in a word, you understand, mention your name, with the others at the order back in Malar. I know a few people in the Inquisition, they always look for minds which are awake. The diplomat in him, the Marico Fabelnad that had swayed the royals of Catalan, was back. He saw it all before him, as he had seen it 100 times. He entered the arena from which she had no escape. Promises, dreams, possibilities. Of course, I would need to get to know you a bit better before I put my word in with them. They are very serious people, and they do not have a lot of time. He put his hand on a chair next to him. She went over and sat down, holding her breath. He moved his chair back a bit, and with all patience crossed his legs, resting one arm on them, with a hand around his chin, in a contemplative pose. "Tell me about your childhood," he said. Chapter 2, Part 5. Detention Block, Ulina. The detention block seemed to go further into the dark than they had anticipated. Another avenue opened up. They had eventually reached a point from where they could no longer see the guards. It was then that Ulina and Lesenco stopped. "Hey mate," Lesenco said to the jailer, who turned around surprised. "Would it by any chance be possible that you could give us the keys so we could talk to the people ourselves?" The jailer looked at them, then tilted his head. "Only I open for prisoners, usually." "Understood." Ulina walked by the jailer, but Lesenco remained in his position. "I think it would be best. We have very sensitive discussions to deal with, if you understand." The jailer turned around to Lesenco and looked at him. "I still don't understand." "Mate, is for your own safety." The jailer looked at Lesenco with squinted eyes. "Is that a thread?" A hand wrapped around his neck, another around his mouth. Ulina had a firm grip on him. Quickly, but not frantically, Lesenco moved in. From his own bag, he pulled a gag and wrapped it around the man's mouth. The torch dropped onto the ground and extinguished. Ulina cursed. The jailer made an attempt to free himself, but now the gag was in place. Ulina had 2 arms around his neck and choked the man until he stopped moving. "Better like this anyways. He's out," Ulina proclaimed. "But not for long." They looked around, but couldn't see anything. "Which direction did we come from?" Lesenco whispered. "Damn it, this is taking too long. Where do we go? Don't do anything rash right now." Ulina had put down the young jailer and was now searching with her arms in the darkness. She found Lesenco's shoulder. "Good. Now we go in my direction, along the walls. Pick up the keys." He searched the jailer, found the keys. There were so many. "Who does not like their prison block?" Lesenco lamented. "Have you ever heard of the shadow torture?" Ulina asked. Lesenco shook his head, then added, "No." When he realized she could not see him, she dragged him along the wall through the corridor. "Is this one of the funny things you learned during your time in Terrain?" "No," Ulina said. "The syndicates are not usually that cruel. They cut off your fingers or bash your head in with an axe when the stars align, but they don't stick you into a shadow cell. Hey, here's a door." Lesenco started to fiddle with the keys whilst she felt the contours of the door. The door was so small, and there were 2 above each other. "Stay where you are," she said. Then she moved slowly down the wall. There were more, and more, and more. They were directly next to each other. She moved back hastily. "Check if one of the keys work." He tried a couple of keys, but eventually one of them went into the lock. "Don't open it yet," Ulina said. She was afraid, significantly more afraid than she had been when they were surrounded by enemies. "Just check if the same key matches all the locks here." He tried and then confirmed. "Yes. This is not a castle. This is a prison," she proclaimed. Chapter 2, Part 6. Keep, Marico. And this is how I ended up in the Totem Guards. Marico had made sure to listen intently. The most important part to keep conversation going, he had found, was to listen, as if there was literally nothing more important or interesting on the whole atlas. It had gotten really dark, and now a servant came in to light the lanterns inside the room. As the door stood open, Marico noticed Ariane looking over her shoulder. He turned and saw a soldier giving her a sign. He saw that Marico had noticed him, then nodded and returned to his post. For a moment there was nothing said as the servant lit the last lights. Marico's thoughts raced. Had she just communicated with her soldier about his compatriots? After the man who kindled the lanterns had left, Ariane began to speak. "I am very deeply honored by your attention, your expertness, but I fear..." Ariane continued, taking his wrist tightly to make clear her deep appreciation. "That I must soon attend my duties." "Yes, of course," he said. However, could I interest you of telling me a final story of yours? Ariane looked at him for a moment with an inscrutable expression. Then she slowly nodded. Yes, of course you may. Marico smiled. Well, he said, leaning back in his seat. I was thinking about this country. I've been traveling a bit and must say it is quite... I'm sure you must not be offended once I finish my thought here. It is quite dirty. You told me stories of how you went about cleaning the houses with the honest youth when you were young. I do see the same persistence and admirable attitude here, something that seems to be more than tradition. Would you enlighten me? It is always a safe bet, if one wants to prolong a conversation, to strike up a topic in which the person one is talking to has a deep passion and conviction. He hoped to have trapped her in the obligation to sing praise to the cause, but instead he tried something he knew how to. Ariane smiled. This is a very good spot, indeed, the cunning intellect of a priest. Marico smiled modestly. As Ariane looked out to the window into the thunder sky, Marico allowed himself to gather his confidence. He was sure the communication with the soldier was a simple routine. When I was a very young girl, just about conscious, my mother died, as you know, at the mercy of the great fungal plague. It is not an easy thing for a child to see the mother die. The plague, of course, was transmitted by small, crawling parasites, but also larger animals. So one day, when my mother had contracted it, my father killed her, and then every cow we owned. There was a long pause. I am sorry to hear that such was your fate, Marico finally proclaimed. She acknowledged his condolences with a soft smile. He did what needed to be done to protect me. After he had killed my mother to spare her the pain, the cows to protect me, and had sent me out of my home with nothing but a bit of food, I have been told he killed himself. She nodded. Such is the fate of those who let parasites and filth into the public order. She walked over to him and sat down. Ever since I've been young, ever since the orphanage and the honest youth, I've been good with tracking down parasites. I've been good with cleaning up. I have established order wherever I go. This is why I became an inquisitor. When there's scum somewhere, I will remove it. When there is a parasite, she leaned forward and looked Marico straight into the eyes. I will find them and I will crush them. Chapter 2, Part 7. Detention Block. Ulina. Feel here, she said, while she was walking down the direction of the cells, feeling alongside the walls for irregularities. Lesenco close behind her. She continued. All of these doors, they are small. They are shadow cells. They are fully dark and barely fit a human. You have to crawl in, and then they close the door behind you, and if you are unlucky, they forget about you. I've seen something like this when I was still working for the Honored Order. Outside Aeon they had a small wrench, and underground there was a cellar with 20 small boxes. And if you would not have known what they were, they might have just been forgotten there forever. But the order at the time was to open them and bring the prisoners in them to trial, where they were supposed to testify. We got them out of their boxes. One had died and her soul evaporated, just gone from existence. The others, with one exception, were completely insane, not a straight thought between their ears. That's how the Empire wants their witnesses. She had reached the end of the dark prison room. They must have by now passed many dozens of cells. The next wall, the cells continued. I just hope the senator was put in recently enough so he's still with himself. We are losing time, Lesenco remarked. I really don't want to cut your backstory short, and congratulations, it is terrifying to hear about this while standing in a pitch-black cellar, but we got a job to do. There are hundreds of cells. Alright, you try opening them and feel if somebody's inside. I will walk down the walls and try and make contact. If someone is still in these cells, they probably want out, and maybe they're sane and can help us with the rest. Lesenco grumbled. Of course I have to feel for the skeletons in the closet. But he went at it quickly and duty-bound. Indeed, the first few cells were empty, but eventually Ulina whispered, I have someone. He hurried towards her voice. Hey. A silent voice came from inside the box. Lesenco hurried, trying key after key, whilst Ulina searched around the place where Lesenco was opening. The cards of the senator, I think I found them. The first cell was now open, and Lesenco reached in. Feeling a body, he pulled back. Ulina had successfully extracted the woman from what had been supposed to be her tomb. She could barely stand. Just give me a minute to get used to standing again, she said faintly. Ulina allowed it. Get strong.
so you can help others. We don't have time. We have infiltrated the castle, so you're not out of danger. Rather death than the box, the woman determined. Give me the quickest version of what happened, Lesenco asked. Convoy got attacked, took the whole thing out. Surprised word got out there. They took us in for interrogation, but soon saw that we didn't know anything. Got transported here for storage. We've been in this box here now for... I really cannot tell. Lesenco had now opened many doors, and some on the lower levels had made it out of the boxes, helping others to get out as well, and reminding themselves how to stand upright. Where's the senator? Lesenco inquired. I think we found him, some guardsmen said. Where? Can he not speak? Words matter. Yes. It got silent. Was that the senator? Silence. Can somebody confirm that this is the senator speaking? Yes, it is the senator, someone else said faintly. Goddess, damn it. He's gone nuts. This bloody affair is cursed like Manonin. Lesenco could no longer keep his disappointment at bay. It mixed with the unease of the darkness. Hey, Lesenco, Ulina whispered aloud. Keep it together. We will look at the situation by daylight. Hey, everyone else, I'm Ulina. Over there is a pilot speaking, Lesenco. We are here to get you out. On the end of the detention block, there are 2 guards. We need to lure them in, take their uniforms. Then we have to take a couple of stairs into the platform tower. There is a storm, which means only a few people should be out. We will need to hurry up because we have already spent significantly more time than we should have. Now, who here can use throwing stars? Chapter 2, Part 8. Keep, Marico. Are you in love? Ariane looked at him with a smile, a very thinly veiled one. Beg your pardon? Marico got confused by the switch of topic. I just wondered if you find yourself attracted to me, because... She stopped. He looked at her. Ariane, what are you trying to do? She smiled. I see there's no fooling you. I just wanted to find out if you were in love with me. He slowly, then emphatically shook his head. She nodded, but did not seem disappointed. She stood up. Marico was still trying to wrap his head around this change of topic. He stood up as well, mostly out of politeness and because he did not know what else to do. In that case, you owe me an explanation. Really? Yes, she said. Again, she smiled. Why was your pulse racing, then? You remember? Marico stood there for a moment. What options did he have? I need to be convincing, true to the idea of what makes one's pulse go faster. Should he admit his love, or was it too late anyways? The lie had been uncovered. The Inquisitor had done her job. I will admit I get nervous with guardsmen around that are not my own. I still cannot help it. It is in my nature, he said, finally. I understand. So when you were out on the plaza where we first met, you were not nervous because... He fished for a good response. Well, I was with my compatriots, which I knew very well, so I felt safe. You see, the lie wants to be detected. It is one of its hallmarks. Don't you tell me anything about lies? Marico stepped closer to her, pulling all the anger that had built in him for the last years towards her. I've been in the inner circle of the Citadel. I know everything about what people will lie for. Don't you dare accuse me. She stopped where she stood, with a puzzled look on her face. I am not sure I'm following, she said, eventually, calmly. Of course you're not here for any alternative purpose than what you said you were. Marico nodded. This is correct. Great. So everything as you said, which is beautiful. Marico nodded. This is correct. Great. So everything is as you said, which is beautiful. Orderly as I like it, you know that. I will also do you the favor and get rid of the guards out there. She walked over to the door, opened it. The guardsman leaned into the room. Could I, she began, request that you lock down the castle and find the 2 compatriots of his expertness. If they are not where they said they would be, which is in the chapel, nor if they are inquiring about materials, please arrest them until we have made sure that there's no misunderstanding. The man outside nodded briefly, then shouted some orders down the corridor as she closed the door. Marico felt icy shivers all across his skin. I will no longer expend any energy with my anger because I see that you are not within the realm of reason. And I thought we had such a great start. Marico shook his head and leaned against the wall. I really wanted to give you that promotion in any way I could, but after such rude and impolite ways of handling this, I can, of course, no longer go through with it. Ariane nodded. I wonder which one of us would win in a duel. Imagine, just the two of us in this room. Marico first said nothing, then shrugged. You, of course, I don't carry a weapon. Ariane stopped, looked at him with implied meaning. Then she continued her slow pacing up and down the room. It saddens me that you would not wish for the greatest amount of security, because it tells me you're not one of us. One of us, one of the Order. We would have never missed the chance to find the parasite which sucked the blood from civilization. Now I have you here. Is there anything you want to ask before you get arrested? Chapter 3, Chances. Part 1, Detention Block, Lesenco. The prison guards stood in front of the gate. Every now and then, one risked a nervous look back into the void, the blank long corridor from where they were unbeknown to them watched. Lesenco and Ulina, merely shadows against the entrance light, looked behind them, where a few guardsmen and women had gathered. They could hear them whispering. 2 of the men had received 2 throwing stars each. Now they slowly walked towards the entrance, ready to go. Ulina walked in fast, and eventually the torchlight touched her. Hey soldiers, we have an issue with our torch over here. It's gone out. Could you quickly borrow one of yours? They two looked at each other. When they looked back to her, a rushing mob had appeared out of the blackness and sprang at them. They were unable to draw their swords and merely squeaked. 2 prisoners each held the men down whilst they were undressed. After the good textile had been given to new owners, Lesenco walked over to Ulina. I suggest we just leave them here. Lock the door from the outside. Somebody will come to get them eventually. They might scream. No, let me correct. They will scream. What are you going to do, kill them? Lesenco thought for a moment. Then he shook his head. Idealist. Fine. Lesenco smiled and watched her walk over to the soldiers, explaining the lot to them. In the meantime, most of the 20 or so guards, service personnel, and the mad senator had gathered in a cohesive bunch and started to acclimate to seeing the light again. Listen, Lesenco gathered the others while Ulina closed the prison behind the guards. We will board and flee on the TOT-31 airship. It is floating right above us in the big tower behind the keep that is currently being built. It was planned that getting there would be super easy, barely an inconvenience. All we'd need to do is walk up to the tower. But there's a night shift and they're working on the very same tower that we will be walking up through. And they will be unloading the airship materials all night. I therefore have a proposal. Chapter 3, Part 2. Keep. Marico. Ariane had drawn her sword and looked at its reflection in the light of the lanterns. Remarkably pure, she smiled and put it back. You are a strange, honored fanatic. Marico had given up the play, but he was not done with her yet. If he was going down here, he could at least enjoy his last minutes of existence before he was killed and his soul was dumped down a hatch at the back of a temple where it would fade away and be lost forever. As much as I appreciate your dad, it might have been better he would not have taken the precautions he did. Ariane smiled. Wishing your enemies dead is low insult. I've expected more from a man of your expertness. Marico frowned. My expertness tells me that you will find yourself in Malar between liars and you will not hate it. Ariane smiled. I assume you do not actually have personal experience with it, given that you're, a Catomea spy? Matter of fact, I actually do have personal experience. Why do you think I have taken this mission? Ariane put away the sword. Honestly, yes. I was waiting for you to tell me all about your childhood, now that you know mine. Isn't it weird that everything that really mattered, I could find out about you without knowing a single thing about your childhood? Marico raised an eyebrow. But you see, I did not need to. Because to know a cockroach, all you need is to observe it go about its business until it gives away the place where you need to put the poison. You are all about these parasites, are you? Ever considered that they are human? So? Marico paused in disbelief. Are you serious? Oh please, you're an operative. You're telling me you've never seen a reason to take the life of a few for the good of many? I'm a diplomat. No, I've not seen it, and there's a big difference between making a sacrifice and sacrificing someone else. Ariane laughed. You amuse me. You know your way with words. Surprisingly, many roaches do. Roaches? This is what you call the terrorists. Marico nodded, then shook his head. You are so far gone, there's nothing I can do about that. She laughed. You're amazing. Please tell me more. How do you come around to using words like that? Was a diplomat. A little bit more detail? Diplomat. Got around everywhere, pretty much. Was in the boon loads. Had good business in Amorea until the Onodem plague swept in. Got me reluctant to get my little sister out of prison in Custodia. And half a month later, she had already died from torture. And her soul was dumped somewhere in the temple by a priest who was either oblivious or evil. So this is why you came here? She smiled again, this time wide and not thinly veiled. She walked over to the door, opened it, and addressed the soldier outside. Please take special care to look at the detention block. Chapter 3, Part 3. Main Tower, Lesenco. The main defense tower was a big tower that had many stories, with many not yet completed. Somewhere on the 4th level, a few men, 5 to be exact, worked on the wood, which laid the ground for the stone which would be added later. However, a staircase going around the tower was already in place. It was from here that 2 guards in spotless white walked up to them, and one said, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the Inquisitor has requested your presence downstairs. The workers looked at each other terrified. What would the Inquisitor need them for? They hurried off, leaving the tower empty. Yes, it is time, Ulina confirmed. Lesenco and Ulina entered the tower and climbed the stairs up to the airship platform. There the airship was floating with an open cargo door, fixed on the bollards which seemed to have been created just a few days ago. Nobody could be seen from the outside, so they walked towards it with the confidence of someone who belonged in this place. The TOT-31 had a gunnery loadout for air-to-ground, which was mediocre but usable, and most importantly quick to make ready with little experience. The top sported 2 advanced rapid-fire ballistas, which under other circumstances would have been very useful. Leaning over to Ulina just before they entered through the cargo door, he said, Please have someone immediately on these turrets. They looked to all sides, saw nobody, and made their way to the cockpit. It was empty. Get the others now, Lesenco demanded. I will do preparations. Chapter 3, Part 4. Keep, Marico. I don't understand for the life of me how you could possibly be so blind as to believe that you are fighting a righteous cause. Marico shook his head in disbelief. Ariane raised an eyebrow. As long as people like you don't get into our lands, there are no dead people. But you always do. And you know, most people are reasonable, intelligent, logical. They really get it. And when they meet people like you, it is not tolerated. That is the power of the Onodem state. There's an order to it that the barbarian states outside will never be able to achieve because they don't have the courage it takes. Marico threw up his arms. Says the woman who has never been outside her own country. What difference does it make? You would see that people have better lives elsewhere, and most of your compatriots are actually aware of that. They live exactly the lives that they are supposed to. They are not free to choose their own sacrifice. You don't need to be. They want to be, though. No, they don't. Marico shook his head. Fine. If it is that illusion that you find so attractive, it is yours to keep. Of course. Ariane shrugged. I will teach you a lesson. You're good with words. You're good in the art of persuasion. I will get you a chance to, before your death, see what I mean. You frame it as it would be a service to me, but you just want to enjoy yourself in your perverse way. Maybe I do, little terrorist. But what does it matter? You're now in my hands. I would like a trial. You'll get one. Try to convince the night shift workers assembly. Just outside the room there's a speaker platform and the night shift workers should by now be gathering. If you can convince them to leave with you, if there's one amongst them who would join you, you're free to go. This is your trial. He looked at her for a moment, but she seemed earnest. So he stood up and walked over to the door. She nodded, came walking over, opened the door, and then went out first. He followed her. To the sides he could see workers walking up and down, and to them all they saw was a priest and an inquisitor strolling down the corridor. The small balcony above the plaza constituted the announcement platform. There he came to stand, and the inquisitor stepped back a bit, but remained behind him. For a bit he considered just jumping down to his death. Whatever happened to him after he was arrested was likely worse. He kept the thought of the jump around as an option and tried to talk first. Dear citizens, I would like you to join me on the journey out of Rangeland into the capital of Catomea, Alinor, where I have some very powerful friends. You will be traveling there and never need to return to this place. Ever. Consider it. Is there anyone here who would like to go?" He stopped. People below had briefly looked up, listened to the first 2 sentences, and then kept going about their business. Nobody was interested. He stepped back. "The terrorist always believes he is in the right, otherwise he would not commit the acts of violence," Ariane explained. Marico looked into the night, and a shadow slowly fell on his face. Was there something about what she said that could be true? He was about to turn, but then the shadow dropped a rope. He looked up, then to his back where Ariane stood. "You're absolutely right," Marico smiled a sad smile. "I guess this country can only be helped with rubber and iron." Then he put his hands around the rope. Ariane sprung into action, but he had already jumped and pushed away from the platform, and now someone above pulled him up. Above him, the silent shadow of the airship drifted away, pushed by strong winds. The rope got pulled up, and now that he climbed on board, he could hear the horses doing their utmost to power the propellers, and very slowly the airship began to move away from the castle. For a moment everyone held their breath as they looked down upon the castle which drifted by, seeing the white guards frantically scramble along the walls to respond, but they only had small ballistas on station, and the airship was well on its way. They shot for the propellers once or twice, but the airship was already out of range. Lesenco and Ulina greeted him. They wanted to talk, but he gave them a hug instead, and after a few minutes of silence, he walked over and sat down in the storage compartment. And there he found a bottle of hero spirit, which he decided to empty. As he looked out towards the silhouettes of the castle, he thought to himself, "We are leaving the prison of a country in which there is a castle that is a prison, in which there was an actual prison. I hope I'll never ever have to see this place again."
Soul Atlas is an expansive fantasy world full of ancient countries, intricate magic, and confidential mysteries. Soon there will be even more music, films, stories, graphic novels, and games within this universe, and you will be able to access it all here, inside the new Soul Atlas app. Open the app and explore the guide. Take your first guided steps into this new and spellbinding world. Move into the chronicles where all our major events are stored, from stories embedded with one click as well as related behind the scenes and lore. And also music you can listen to right inside the app or on your favorite platform. Be notified when upcoming films and games are released. Finally, you'll be able to dive in and explore the cellar of our in-depth library, the maps, the secrets, and paintings. Download the app now for free and discover the groundbreaking fantasy world of Soul Atlas.